Good evening, and welcome to another Thought Leaders Lecture presented by UTMB Health in partnership with Space Center Houston. I'm Becky Trout-Umbehagen, Community Engagement Director for UTMB Health. We are over the moon proud to bring you tonight's installment of Thought Leaders, a look ahead to the next lunar landing. We're also looking ahead to a time when we can come back together and enjoy these lectures in person. But for now, we hope you're staying safe and enjoying this online format. We encourage you to continue to follow COVID-19 safety precautions and to get vaccinated as soon as possible. UTMB Health has already vaccinated nearly 200,000 Texas residents. To learn more or to sign up for a vaccine, please visit the link below. But for now, let's all just sit back, relax, and enjoy going back to the moon, lunar landing.
Hello, I'm William T. Harris, President and CEO of Space Center Houston. We're a dynamic science and space exploration learning destination. We're a nonprofit science center and also serve as the official visitor center for NASA Johnson Space Center. We share the story of human space exploration, past, present, and future, with more than 1.25 million visitors annually from around the world through on-site and virtual experiences. Thank you for joining Space Center Houston's series program, Going Back to the Moon, Lunar Landing, presented by University of Texas Medical Branch. Our series features science and space experts from across the country who provide insights and perspectives on space exploration. Today, we will focus on human landing systems, or HLS, how NASA plans to return the first man and first woman to the South Pole of the Moon in the next few years. It's all part of NASA's Artemis program, the journey to return to the Moon, and the current plans for how we will get there. While a tremendous amount of science exploration will take place on the Moon, the knowledge gained will inform research and planning for when astronauts travel to Mars. Through our Thought Leader series and other programming, Space Center Houston makes science and learning about space exploration accessible to everyone. We are open with new exhibits, new live shows, new film and spacious outdoor experiences with health and safety measures at the forefront of our daily operations. You can see the newly installed one-of-a-kind 7-foot bronze statue depicting Apollo 13 astronauts Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes. The Apollo 13 sculpture is the center's newest addition to Rocket Park. We'll take you back in time to relive the excitement of the Apollo era with our spring special exhibit, Apollo, When We Went to the Moon. Take an in-depth guided experience of Space Center Houston on the new Space Expert Tour. So lots of things that you can do on site. You can avoid time in line with advanced time admission tickets. You'll experience one of our most popular experiences, the NASA Tram Tour, which takes guests behind the scenes at NASA Johnson Space Center. Through the Space Center free app, you can select and reserve seats on the tram tour you wish to board at a designated time, so no more waiting in long lines. Plan your journey with us today by going to spacecenter.org and review our Know Before You Go guide with information for planning your visit. And now on with our March Thought Leader Series panel, Going Back to the Moon, Lunar Landing, presented by UTMB. NASA continues to advance planning for a return to the Moon through the Artemis program, building on knowledge and experience gained from the Apollo program and subsequent research. The goal of Artemis goes well beyond a return to the Moon. New strategies, innovations, and technologies are being implemented for this mission. A key element of this mission is landing on the Moon. This sounds simple, however, it is very complicated and fraught with risks. The Human Landing System, or HLS, is the final mode of transportation that will take astronauts to the lunar surface in the Artemis Lunar Exploration Program. During early missions, astronauts would live inside the pressurized crew cabin portion of the lander for up to a week. Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, is leading the development and crew demonstrations of the HLS, which are being designed and developed by American companies. NASA streamlined its partnering approach to empower commercial industry to meet NASA's goals of achieving sustainability, while also expediting lander development to meet the 2024 timeline. In April 2020, NASA announced the selection of 3 companies to begin development of the Artemis HLS. Our NASA experts are working closely with these commercial partners to build their HLS, leveraging decades of human spaceflight experience and the speed of the commercial sector to achieve a lunar landing in the next few years. I'm now delighted to welcome our expert panelists, Lisa Hammond, NASA Human Landing Systems Associate Program Manager at NASA Johnson Space Center, and Dr. Don Krupp, NASA Human Landing Systems Associate Program Manager at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. They will discuss NASA's Human Landing System, which will land the next humans on the moon during the Artemis program. Dr. Krupp has more than 30 years of experience at NASA. He's responsible for the operation of the program organization, including strategic planning, assigning and adjusting priorities and work schedules, managing challenges and issues, and security of the program's property and data. Our second panelist, Lisa Hammond, is NASA Human Landing Systems Associate Program Manager at NASA Johnson Space Center. She has more than 29 years of expertise in systems engineering, integration, operations, partnering, and leading change. She assures integrated coordination of HLS requirements and resource utilization across Johnson Space Center, and that JSC commitments to the HLS program are met. Now let's begin the discussion with our panel. At the conclusion, we'll answer questions and have a great conversation about their program work. First, we'll hear from Dr. Don Krupp. Dr. Krupp.
Thank you, William. I'm honored and excited to be here to talk to you today. As you mentioned, I am part of NASA's Human Landing System program, which is one of the activities that NASA is doing under the Artemis program to return humans to the surface of the moon. I'm sure everybody remembers the Apollo program. That took Neil Armstrong as the first human to the surface of the moon. Well, Apollo had a twin sister, according to Greek mythology, and her name is Artemis. And Artemis was the goddess of the moon. So it's kind of appropriate that NASA's new endeavors to go to the moon take on the Artemis name, because not only are we returning humans to the surface, but we're also planning on taking the first woman to the surface of the moon. So let me talk to you a little bit about how we're going to get to the moon. As I mentioned, there's a series of activities that are part of Artemis, and we're going to be going to the moon through a series of test flights, and then followed by the actual landing on the moon. So our first mission is going to be Artemis I, and that's going to be basically a test flight of both the Space Launch System launch vehicle, the SLS vehicle, and the Orion spacecraft. And the Orion spacecraft will be the spacecraft that the astronauts actually ride from the surface here on Earth all the way to the moon. So that first test flight, Artemis I, will be basically a flight to check out all the systems, fly the Orion capsule around the moon, make sure that all the systems are working properly, and that it is safe for to add crew to it. After Artemis I, we'll do Artemis II, which will be a very similar test flight, except this time we'll actually have astronauts on board. Those astronauts will be able to check out all the equipment needed to sustain human life, keep them alive in the environments of space, as well as allow them to do some checkout of the vehicle. Basically, it's a test drive of the Orion spacecraft. Once we've completed those two successful tests, we'll move on to Artemis III. And Artemis III is where we introduce the Human Landing System landers into the Artemis program, along with the Space Launch System and the Orion capsule, to actually bring humans to the lunar surface. As part of the Human Landing System, we are a little bit different than Apollo. With Apollo, NASA had prime contractors to build the various elements of the Apollo lander. With Human Landing System, what we are doing is NASA is partnering with commercial industry, allowing them to leverage their rapid development and ability to bring things to market quickly, and coupling that with NASA's extensive experience and history with human spaceflight. This allows the partnership to bring what they are best at together to help make sure that we have a safe system that we field as quickly as possible. So let me talk a little bit about the three different contractors that we have selected as part of the Human Landing System program. Back in April of 2020, NASA awarded 3 contracts to 3 different contractor teams as part of that partnership with NASA to build the Human Landing System program. We asked for industry to propose their lander concepts, hoping that we would get some very innovative and some different concepts than the government architecture, the government design that we had been working on to make sure we understood what was needed. And boy, did industry deliver. We have three very different concepts with three different teaming arrangements. On the first one, we have a team led by Blue Origin with teammates Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and Draper Labs. It is a three-element architecture containing an ascent element, a descent element, and a transfer element to help move the vehicle around. Our next team is Dynetics, and it has a different concept in that it has arranged the crew capsule to be very close to the lunar surface that allows easier access for the astronauts to leave and enter the vehicle after they do their spacewalks. And then finally, we awarded a contract to SpaceX, and their concept is a single vehicle that descends to the lunar surface, allows the astronauts to perform their moonwalks, and then takes them back into lunar orbit where they meet up with Orion and ride back to Earth in the Orion capsule. So now that we've talked a little bit about the three companies that are developing lander systems, let me talk a little bit about what our astronauts may be doing on the surface as part of Artemis. One of the main differences between the Apollo program and Artemis Human Landing System program is the amount of time that the astronauts are going to actually be able to spend on the lunar surface. With the Apollo program, the astronauts spent about 3 days, a little more than 3 days on the surface of the moon. With Human Landing System, we're planning on having at least about a week for the astronauts. And then you'll hear a little bit more about our longer range plans on how we might extend the time that the astronauts spend on the surface. With Apollo, the astronauts collected lunar samples of the rocks in the regolith on the surface to bring back. Our Human Landing System will also allow the astronauts to collect samples from a different region of the moon and bring those back for the scientists here on Earth to analyze. One of the other differences between Apollo and the Human Landing System is the Apollo astronauts only got to participate in about 3 spacewalks, 3 moonwalks. With the Human Landing System, we're looking at 4 or 5 or even 6 spacewalks as the landers are more developed and we get a higher performance and get additional capability from them. Here's another primary example of how HLS is different from Apollo. With the Apollo lunar lander, that allowed 2 crew members to go down to the lunar surface for, like I said, about 3 days, but they had to stay around the equatorial region of the moon, which is the equator of the moon. With the HLS system, we're designing that system to carry up to 4 crew members down to the surface of the moon. And we're allowing it to land on any place on the surface of the moon, including the polar regions, either the North Pole or the South Pole. Why is that different? Is the Human Landing System program is looking at how do we develop and design our systems so that they can be sustainable, so that we can go to the moon more than the number of times we did with Apollo. We need to make it affordable, we need to make it a little easier, and we need to be able to go and sustain life there more easily. The other reason that we like the South Pole is NASA has discovered that there is actually water, ice on the moon around the South Pole regions. Because the South Pole gets a lot of, or the angle of the sun between on the moon and some of the very deep craters, there are some areas on the moon that do not ever receive any sunlight. And so water has been captured there and formed ice. And part of what our astronauts are going to be doing is looking for that ice package and performing experiments to see how we might be able to use that ice as we learn to live and work better on the moon. At the bottom of the screen there, what you're seeing is what a typical week on the moon might look like as part of the early Artemis missions. So the astronauts would have left the Orion capsule that they rode in to get to the moon, entered the Human Landing System. That landing system would have landed them on to the surface of the moon. Then they would do 2 days of moonwalks where they would be setting up science experiments, collecting samples. Then they would have a rest day because the moonwalks are quite tiring. Then they would do 2 more days of moonwalks. And on that final day, they'd get the human landing system ready for flight and then lift off from the surface of the moon and go back into lunar orbit, where they would rendezvous with Orion, get back into the Orion spacecraft, and head back for a safe landing on Earth. So that kind of hopefully gives you a little bit of idea about what the human landing system is, what it can do, and how it fits into Artemis. What I'm going to do now is turn it over to Lisa Hammond and let her talk to you a little bit about how NASA is working a little bit more with our contractors. Lisa?
Hi, Don. I'm excited about being here, and I'd like to walk you through a little bit more depth of the work that we do here on the ground to get ready for the mission. NASA HLS works with partners to perform what we often call collaboration support. It's a teaming effort to make sure that the contractors and NASA are working progressively to move forward in design and test and even verification of capabilities prior to the launch and landing on the moon. We solve the problems together. We've got design support and analysis, folks that will reach out and work with the contractors and vice versa, the commercial contractors working with NASA. We form those relationships so that the integrity and the quality of the design and the products going forward to support the mission are in top shape and are acceptable. Those products could range from test equipment to support equipment, consumables like food or toiletries, and all of that type of hardware. The gateway is our future, and we're looking forward to being able to establish an infrastructure for a long-term exploration, take the journey from Gateway to other destinations is a part of our planning, and we look forward to having crew to be able to live and become mobile back and forth to the moon via a design like Gateway, and be able to use that Gateway as a positioning and a launch to places like Mars, and having those missions to be able to further explore and perform science. You see the picture of the Artemis Base Camp, and Don did a great job of trying to give you insight and understanding of a day-to-day, a 1-week activity for an EVA crew or commercial crew. Some of the vehicles and some of the capabilities will require additional design vehicles. We've got rovers. You'll have science that may be positioned on a previous mission, and then the crew will return to the moon and be able to complete the science and carry that data back to Earth. With the HLS, the Human Landing System, also is docked and parked on the moon, and with the ability to ascend back to Earth or in the future to a gateway. Moon before Mars. So there are challenges both with going to the moon, going in space, and exploration total. We'd like to reduce some of the risk of going further into space and Mars by doing lots of tests, lots of science, and understanding the space environment by working on the moon first. We'll be able to prove technologies and mature technologies both for human spaceflight and for the Earth. There are benefits that will come to our nation as a result of the work that's being performed on the moon. The exploration to Mars would be from 2 to 3 years, and we've got to learn how to survive and sustain ourselves in an environment like the moon, and that is what helps us to have confidence to go beyond the moon to places like Mars. So we're all excited. We've been pulling together our partnerships with the contractors. We've got an excellent team of engineers and scientists with the capability and purpose and charge through Artemis and the human landing system to go to the moon, and we're excited. And how do we do that? Part of what we do is work with different people and different organizations across NASA and across the commercial entities. Some of the partnerships that we've talked about and collaborations that we perform, the teaming helps with the food scientists developing food for the crew to be able to survive, being able to design and develop and be able to certify these different designs. We've got avionics, software, we've got analysis such as loads, and we've got all types of engineers all across America working to help Artemis to be successful. We recruit interns, we recruit geologists, we recruit social media. The part that social media plays in communicating our excitement and our goals for Artemis and for the human landing system is important to us. And what we like to do here is be able to communicate to you our intent to develop the latest spacesuit designs and be able to have in place the communications needed for a crew to be successful when we land on the moon, to be able to sustain and build around the designs that exist, a capability to be able to sustain for a long period of time. We're also doing training on the ground, and you see astronauts training underwater in the neutral buoyancy lab. It gives them a sense of the environment that they will see in space. For all the samples that come back, you've got scientists and geologists that are waiting, just can't wait to get their hands on some of the dust and other particles and items that are brought back from space. So during this pandemic, NASA has been working really hard to keep the public engaged. And we've got activities at the Marshall Space Flight Center that worked across the area to create some STEM projects and put them out on the website for families to be able to use to keep their kids engaged. Take a look at this one. This is one of our own Artemis engineers, Erica Alvarez, working with her son. Thank you all for participating. I've enjoyed speaking with you. Now I'll turn it over to William.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you, Don. So interesting to learn about the system, and also so exciting to learn about the importance of STEM programming. I know that Space Center Houston, along with the other NASA centers, have continued during the pandemic to offer great content for the public. So I'm really excited. We'll show that video at the close of today's program. I am now full of so many questions for both of you, having heard your presentations about the human landing systems. But my first question actually is, there's so much science that's going to happen during this mission, the Artemis mission to the moon. How do you give specifications to the contractors around the engineering design so that you can get all the science done you want to get done? I'm sure there are many more science experiments that you want to have conducted than there's time for. How do you reach resolution around that? How do you determine what science experiments will get included in the specification design for the landers? Maybe we'll start with Don and then have Lisa also respond.
Excellent question, William. So you actually asked two different kinds of questions. So let me try to separate those a little bit. So the first question is around how do you develop the engineering specifications to give to the contractors to make sure we can do some science? Well, because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of different types of science that we want to do. What we have done is we've given the contractors some requirements in terms of how much mass, how much weight they can carry or need to carry down to the lunar surface. We've given them some volume constraints or some volume requirements so that they can design within their lander system, how are they going to package, basically think about it as a trunk, right, of your car. We needed to tell them how big the trunk needed to be able to put whatever we wanted to in it, right? So that's how we've kind of given the requirements to the contractors to build their systems. Now, in terms of the science, that is a different question. We actually have our NASA Science Mission Directorate leading an activity with a lot of the universities around the country to try to do just that. Identify what are the top requirements, what are the top priorities for science on the lunar surface, and then they'll go through a process, a peer kind of process to identify those, and then those science experiments would actually then turn into projects for those investigators to develop their instruments or the data that they need, or however they wanted to do their science, to be able to load into the Human Landing System lander and have it ride down to the surface of the moon.
So I'm curious, I know one of the priorities or something that has emerged in space exploration now are components that are reusable. We're starting to see that with some of the low Earth orbit technologies. Is that something in the specs or something that NASA is looking at for lunar missions, having any components of this architecture be reusable?
So yes, William, great question. While we have not told the contractors specifically that their systems have to be reusable, it is one of NASA's primary goals is that we have a sustainable, affordable architecture that allows us to be able to return to the moon many times and create a campaign of exploration. So we have NASA set up two different types of requirements. Some we identified as threshold requirements, and those are the ones that are primarily focused on making sure we can get to the moon very quickly in 2024. The second set of requirements are our goal requirements, and those are the requirements that we wanted the contractors to be thinking about in terms of that sustainable, affordable architecture. And in meeting those requirements, some of those contractor elements may indeed be reusable. But our primary requirement was we wanted the architecture to be able to be sustainable and affordable so that we can enable long-term exploration.
Fascinating. I have another question about the well-being of astronauts. In the 20 years of International Space Station, and of course, other years of research in space, we've learned a tremendous amount about how we keep astronauts healthy and well and productive. And one really important aspect, especially for longer duration missions, is exercise, right? We have to tell our brain that the astronauts need their bones and tendons. We want to keep them in good aerobic shape. It sounds like the working on the surface of the moon is going to be pretty strenuous, and the missions are going to be shorter, at least initially. So I didn't see anything in the specifications for exercise. Is that a factor for these initial missions with the HLS for astronauts returning to the moon, having some ability for exercise?
Yes, for the near-term HLS missions, we don't have exercise equipment that we will be traveling with astronauts. There are shorter missions. The work on the moon is, we think, adequate enough to keep the crew in shape and healthy. In the past, as you mentioned, for longer duration space station missions, there's treadmills and other equipment that's there to help the crew to maintain their muscle and other capabilities. We don't foresee that in the first few missions for the human landing system. Going beyond the moon and the missions that we have planned today, there may be a need, but today we don't have that need.
Something you mentioned that really caught my attention was the plan to collect samples and have them collected or retrieved and returned to Earth in subsequent missions. And it made me think of Perseverance and the fact that the Perseverance rover on Mars is collecting small tubes of samples and depositing them to be collected at some point in the future and returned to Earth. I'd not heard that before about the moon. That's a fascinating requirement. What kind of samples do you hope will be collected during these lunar missions?
I believe there's going to be a variety of samples that our astronauts are going to be collecting on the surface of the moon. It'll be very similar to Apollo, at least on the initial missions, where they did some geology and identified some particularly interesting samples. Some of the samples might be of the lunar crust itself. Some of them might be some ejecta from a meteor or an asteroid impact with the moon. There'll also probably be some tools that will allow us to dig down and create a kind of a core sample of the layers of the moon's crust. So similar to what we might do here on the Earth with geology. Those samples would be collected and then placed in canisters, sealed canisters, and then those canisters would ride back up into lunar orbit on the HLS along with the astronauts from the surface. But I think that the HLS, Artemis III, Artemis IV type missions would have something very similar to Apollo and very similar to what Perseverance rover is doing robotically on the surface of Mars.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating. Something else that really intrigues me is what do you hope that we will learn from the return to the moon and this initial research that could help inform and prepare us ultimately to send astronauts to Mars?
There's benefit in spending more time on the moon than we did back during Apollo. The more experience we have and we give crew in those environments, especially with dust challenges and things like that, it allows us to prepare ourselves for different types of exploration. Being in space is always a challenge. There's so many things that we have to consider, like communications. The communications from the moon to back to Earth, and being able to complete operations, and the time it takes to complete operations will vary depending on the positioning, what's going on at the time on the lunar surface. And so all of those things play into our knowledge, experience, and decisions for where we would go during exploration to go beyond the moon, and how much time we would have to be able to explore and capture and gather data to help inform even future explorations.
Can you give us a sense of beyond HLS, what are some of the longer term science goals or things that we hope to explore or do on the moon? I know there's a conversation about ultimately having a more extended human presence on the moon. I've heard conversations about in the South Pole, perhaps some type of longer term facility where astronauts would spend a greater amount of time than the 6 or 7 days that are currently proposed. Can you give us a sense of kind of what's on the horizon?
Certainly, I can tell you that there is a lot of planning going on right now within NASA on exactly those, and trying to answer or come up with ideas on how we're going to answer those kinds of questions. So let me try to split it maybe a little into two answers. First is the science. We had Apollo astronauts return some samples that gave our scientists some new knowledge about the moon. We've also had mapping satellites around the moon. And again, every time we get some data from the moon, that answers some questions and creates many, many more questions from the science community. So I think that HLS and Artemis and an extended campaign of exploration and science on the moon is going to generate tremendous amounts of new data and new information, which is going to create even more questions. So that's kind of, I'm afraid we don't even know what we don't know about the moon right now. And every piece we get is just a little bit more information that causes more questions and helps us better understand how the moon was formed, how the Earth was formed, and those interactions. Now, in terms of exploration, you're absolutely right. We would love NASA would love to spend more time on the lunar surface with enhanced capabilities. I think you saw a slide of a potential moon base. So there's a couple things there. Primarily, we want to eventually go to Mars and explore Mars. But as I think Lisa mentioned, Mars is a 2 to 3 year mission away from Earth. About 9 months currently, about 9 months to 12 months to get to Mars, and another 9 to 12 months to come back. And then you need to stay there about a year. So you've got to live away from Earth for a very long time. The longest we've lived away from Earth is our experience with the space station. And it's been human operated for 20 years. But that's only, a couple hours away from something happening on space station to being able to get those astronauts back to the surface of Earth. Part of what we want to do with the moon and longer term exploration is learn how to live away from Earth to get ready and to test those systems that we might need on Mars, or that we will need on Mars. The South Pole is very appealing to us because I mentioned earlier, we have identified that there is ice water on the moon at the South Pole. And so one of those technologies that we are interested in exploring and testing out on the moon is how might we harvest that ice and how might we process it to not only provide maybe water for cooling or for possibly drinking, but also could we turn that water into hydrogen and oxygen that might serve as rocket propellant or propellant that would actually go into fuel cells that would help provide power. So there's a lot of technologies that we recognize that we're going to need on the moon, on Mars, that we want to test on the moon, and just like I said, learn to live away from Earth, and do it in a safe way, so that allows us to minimize or lower the risk as much as possible in going to Mars.
That is absolutely fascinating. I think that's one of the reasons the public is so interested, because that's the important thing about science. Often it's what we never expected that we discover or we gain insights around. There's a particular goal always when you're doing a scientific experiment or investigation, but it's often the associated things that come out that lead to a whole new line of questioning and research, which is so fascinating. We know that's the case in space exploration and the 3,000 experiments that have taken place on ISS over the past 20 years and all the benefits that it has had for humanity. So I'm curious, would either of you go to the moon if you had the opportunity to?
Most definitely.
Yes?
Most definitely. There's the intrigue of what you might see and experience, and our astronauts, our crew, they are heroes. They're amazing. There are challenges. While I sit here and go, oh, I'd love to go, it's great, there are challenges. It is hard work. And there's a lot that has to be considered when going to the moon, or even in our space station. There's processes and procedures, hardware that's there to protect and the capability, provide capabilities for operations. You have to learn all those things to be able to survive in space. And while we all would love to go, we all would have to, before we go learn so much of what the crews before us have learned from Apollo until now, even through shuttle, of the risk and the rewards, to be able to stay within the protocols and the processes to keep you safe and sustain life in those environments.
Well,
the answer is yes.
Don, how about you?
Oh, absolutely. I think of the Apollo expeditions as kind of being a camping trip, a weekend camping trip to the surface. I think what NASA has planned is more of a real exploration effort of learning to live on the moon, learning about the moon. And I think it would be just a tremendous adventure to be able to be on the lunar surface and look back at Earth and what I've heard described as a beautiful marble in this black, in the vastness of black space, and look back and with that true appreciation of what we have here on Earth.
Well, I think it's really becoming feasible now. I mean, it means if you can actually tell it's going to happen that regular citizens are going to be able to explore space. We're going to absolutely, within a very short amount of time, have more accessible for low Earth orbit. And there's the opportunity to potentially go to the moon probably within our lifetime, which is actually pretty exciting. I think that it's one of the reasons why I think there's so much interest in space exploration. And I do want to echo Lisa's comments about NASA's work around advancing STEM learning and education. We at Space Center Houston do the same. And for those of you who do want that vicarious experience of an astronaut, we have a great program called Space Center University for middle school and high school and college students. And we're about to introduce an adult track that's a five-day immersive experience where you go through much of the same orientation and training as NASA engineers and astronauts. So that can be one way to help prepare you for that space tourism experience in the future, if that's of interest to you. I wanted to ask if either of you could, or both of you, please, could just talk a little bit about your backgrounds. How did you become interested in doing what you're doing along this path in your career?
Interesting. As a child, I didn't know a lot about the space program. And that's why I'm really excited about STEM for the children now, because they can get exposed a lot sooner. After graduating from Prairie View A&M, I did work in the aerospace industry, but it was not NASA related. It was not exploration related. Moving into exploration, once I came in, I was hooked. It's exciting, it's rewarding. And I worked my way through learning engineering work, getting ready, testing development hardware, and integrating that development hardware with the crew so that they can be able to give feedback on that. And then through several shuttle missions, supporting shuttle missions and station, a year ago, I was afforded an opportunity to be here and work in HLS, and I'm just elated. The thought of being able to put the first woman and the next man on the moon within my lifetime is a huge reward for the work that we do every day, and the piece that I get to touch and know that I made a contribution to the space industry. It's just wonderful.
Thank you. And Don, what about you? How did you become interested?
So it's very interesting that Lisa said she didn't really grow up. You know, you hear people, I've always wanted to work I looked up at the sky the first time and I always knew I wanted to work for NASA. Well, that doesn't seem to be her experience, and it wasn't really mine either. I was, finishing my senior year as an electrical engineer, and saw a note that NASA was going to be coming for on-campus interviews, and they were only going to have 12 slots. And so it's like, well, okay. So I got up at 5:30 in the morning, which is quite the feat for a college student, to stand in line so that by 8 o'clock, when they posted the list, which was actually a really hard, physical piece of paper, I was able to get one of those 12 interviews. And then didn't think about it, had a pretty good interview. And then about 2 months later, I got a phone call and I got a phone interview and followed up the next day with an actual job offer. Never had been to the Marshall Space Flight Center, didn't really know where it was, but accepted the job, came to and started work. And from that second, then I was hooked. I've got almost 32 years here at NASA, and I can tell you there are probably 3 or 4 days in that career that I just didn't jump out of bed, excited to be able to come to work and work with the tremendous people and do tremendously hard things to help benefit the agency and benefit the public. It's just been a really exciting and really rewarding career that I've had working with all the folks here at NASA.
Wow. Well, thank you both for your feedback and remarks. And what I love about both of your stories is it really is life, right? Where you have to be open to new opportunities. You also have to really aspire for something and show motivation. And I really agree with that. Being a senior in college, getting up at 5:30 in the morning is really rough. But that motivation and dedication, toward your goals. And so that's a great attribute. Well, we've come to the end of our time. I could go on and ask many more questions of our panelists. I want to thank both of you, Don and Lisa, for joining us today for our Thought Leader program. It's so fascinating to learn more about the HLS system, and also it's right around the corner. Before we know it, I think we're launching later this year, Artemis I. So that's all part of that architecture and planning for the return to the moon. So thank you all for joining us today. Please sign in again to spacecenterhouston.org to see our other Thought Leader programs, and we wish you all a safe and interesting spring and summer. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, my name is Erica Alvarez, and I work at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. I work on the Human Landing System program. And today we're going to talk about the Artemis mission. Now, what is the Artemis mission? The Artemis mission is actually a mission where we'll be taking crew or astronauts to the moon on the Space Launch System, and they will be on an Orion capsule. Once they get to the moon, let's pretend this is the moon, they will meet up with a lunar lander. This is just a small mock-up of the Apollo lunar lander, but it will be very similar. Now, the lunar lander will orbit around the moon and have to come down and touch down, sometimes in very dark areas. Now, the thing that's difficult is, let's pretend this is a large crater here. You may be having to go down and be able to avoid a large obstacle, and your lander will have to be sturdy. The legs will have to be strong, and you don't want to shake the astronauts too much because you really have to protect them. Now, on the real lander, we have an engine that will slow the lander down and be able to actually touch down safely. Today, we're going to work on a project called Touchdown. And Touchdown is actually going to be a link on the bottom of this video that will show you what supplies you need so we can build your own lunar lander at home. This is called the Artemis mission, and so we want you to be part of the Artemis mission. So in order to perform this experiment, we just need a few materials that you probably already have at home. First, we'll start with 3 index cards. These are actually 3 by 5 in size. 3 rubber bands. A piece of cardboard, 4 inches by 5 inches. You can actually use the hard poster board or cardboard or any kind of hard paper you may have at home. 10 mini marshmallows. A cup. I like to use the small bathroom cups. You can use a larger cup, but it's a little more challenging when you use the small cup. 2 large marshmallows. These will be your astronauts that will sit in your crew compartment, which will be the cup. Your goal is to try to get this cup to touch down and for the astronauts to not fall off, for this not to tip over where they fall. You have to keep them safe. Scissors, some tape, and 8 straws, preferably the flexi ones that you can try to use to build legs or another part of your lander. Now, for this next part in our video, my special assistant Peter is going to help us with the test. What we have is a few legs here to act as support, some mini marshmallows as feet. We use the paper almost like an accordion to help us damp the blow or the vibration.
And the big marshmallows inside pretend they are astronauts going to space.
Exactly. So now, Peter, give us a countdown.
10, 9,
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, drop. So now the challenge is for you to build your own lander at home. Visit us for more ideas at NASA at Home, #NASA at Home. And the best part of this experiment is the finale.
You get to eat it,
Eat the marshmallows.
but do not eat the ones that you made with tape.